There comes a time in life when you realize that not every invitation deserves your presence. That showing up to every gathering, every event, every so-called celebration isn't always a wise decision. Because as you grow older, your energy, your peace, and your well-being become more valuable than any social obligation. And if you're not careful, the wrong gatherings can leave you feeling drained, uneasy, or even questioning your own happiness. So let's talk about the gatherings that no longer serve you, the ones that disrupt your peace, exhaust your spirit, and take more from you than they give. You don't need them in your life anymore, and once you recognize them, you'll find yourself living with far more joy and far less stress. Let's start with the most obvious. Gatherings filled with gossip and negativity. Have you ever left a get-together feeling worse than when you arrived? Maybe it was the endless chatter about who's doing what, who gained weight, who's struggling, or who isn't living up to expectations. At first, it might seem harmless, just idle conversation, but underneath it all is something much more toxic because gossip isn't just talk, it's energy. And when you surround yourself with those who thrive on the misfortunes or shortcomings of others, that energy lingers. It seeps into your thoughts, your emotions, and sometimes even your own habits. You might not have started the gossip, but just being in that space affects you, and before you know it, you're left with an uneasy feeling in your heart, wondering why you feel exhausted after what was supposed to be a pleasant social gathering. Here's the truth. As you age, you become more aware of the kind of energy you allow into your life, and you realize that the people who constantly talk about others will eventually talk about you. That's why it's okay, no, it's necessary to excuse yourself from these kinds of gatherings. If a conversation doesn't uplift, inspire, or bring warmth, then it's simply not worth your time. Then there are the gatherings built on comparison. You know the ones where every conversation is about whose grandchildren are more successful, who has the biggest house, or who is traveling to the most exotic places. These events aren't about connection, they're about proving something, and if you're not careful, you might find yourself feeling like you need to measure up. You might leave questioning your own choices, your own accomplishments, or even your own happiness. But here's what's important to remember. Your life is not a competition. Your journey is yours alone, and it doesn't need validation from anyone else. There is no race to be won, no prize for who lived the most glamorous life. The real prize is peace, contentment, the ability to wake up in the morning and feel grateful for the life you've lived, no matter how it compares to someone else's. So if you find yourself in a room where the air is thick with competition, where the focus is on outshining rather than connecting, then you have every right to walk away. But let's talk about something even deeper. Family gatherings that bring more stress than joy. Now, this one can be difficult because there's an expectation that family should always come first. That no matter how complicated, how tense, or how draining certain relationships may be, you should still show up. But should you? What if that gathering is filled with unresolved tension? What if it brings up past wounds, forces you into uncomfortable conversations, or makes you feel like you have to walk on eggshells just to keep the peace? You see, not all family events are created equal. Some bring warmth, laughter, and a sense of belonging. Others bring stress, anxiety, and a feeling of obligation rather than joy. And the difference between the two, it's how you feel when you leave. Do you walk away with your heart feeling full, or do you leave with a headache and a heavy spirit? As you get older, you owe it to yourself to choose your peace over your obligations. And that means understanding that family doesn't mean automatic access to your time and energy. If a family gathering consistently drains you, if it reopens wounds that you've worked hard to heal, then it's okay to say no. It's not selfish, it's self-respect. You can love people from a distance. You can send well wishes, make a phone call, and still protect your emotional well-being. And while we're on the subject of emotionally exhausting events, let's talk about funerals or remembrance gatherings for people you barely knew. Now, of course, honoring a loved one is a deeply personal choice, but too often we find ourselves attending out of obligation rather than genuine connection. Maybe it's a distant relative or a friend of a friend or someone you met only a handful of times, and yet there's a sense of pressure to show up, pressure to be seen, pressure to follow social expectations. But here's the thing, grief is personal. Paying respects doesn't always require a physical presence. You can honor someone in a way that feels meaningful to you, whether that's through a quiet moment of reflection, a kind gesture to their family, or even a simple prayer. Attending out of duty rather than true sentiment doesn't serve anyone, not you, and not the person being remembered. So give yourself permission to grieve in your own way without the weight of obligation pulling you into gatherings that feel forced rather than heartfelt. Now, let's shift to something a little different. Events that physically exhaust you. As you age, your body requires a different kind of care. Late night gatherings, events with excessive noise, or parties that require standing for long hours aren't just tiring, they can take a toll on your health. Maybe in your younger years, these events were exciting, but now they leave you feeling more depleted than fulfilled. And that's perfectly okay. Life is about adjusting, choosing environments that suit the person you are today rather than the person you used to be. There's no need to force yourself into situations that make your body ache, your mind foggy, or your energy levels plummet. Choose comfort. Choose gatherings that allow you to be present without exhausting yourself. Because joy isn't found in the biggest, loudest events. It's found in the quiet moments, in the spaces where you feel comfortable, at ease, and truly connected. And while we're talking about physical well-being, let's not forget about gatherings centered around overindulgence. You know, the ones where the food is endless, the drinks keep pouring, and there's an unspoken expectation to indulge past your limit. Now, there's nothing wrong with enjoying a good meal or celebrating with a toast, but when the environment pressures you to go beyond what feels right for your body, it stops being enjoyable. As you age, you become more aware of what your body needs and what it doesn't. And if an event encourages excess at the expense of your well-being, then it's okay to step back. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your choices. You simply have to honor what feels right for you. Your time, your energy, and your peace are yours to protect. Not every gathering deserves your presence. Not every event requires your attendance. And the moment you start choosing your well-being over social expectations, you'll notice something incredible. You'll feel lighter, more at ease, more in control of your own happiness. And isn't that what aging gracefully is all about? One of the greatest gifts of aging is the clarity that comes with it. You begin to see life for what it truly is. You recognize what matters and what doesn't. And more importantly, you realize that your time is no longer something to be spent on anything or anyone that leaves you feeling drained, uneasy, or undervalued. There's a freedom in saying no to gatherings that no longer serve you. You're no longer obligated to attend events simply because you always have. The older you get, the more you understand that your presence is a privilege, not an obligation. And that means reserving it for places and people that bring warmth, joy, and true connection into your life. There are gatherings that will leave you feeling full, not just in the sense of a shared meal, but in the sense of shared laughter, deep conversations, and the kind of presence that nourishes the soul. And then there are the ones that leave you feeling depleted, the ones that require more from you than they give, the ones that drain your energy, create unnecessary stress, or pull you into spaces where you don't feel at ease. Those are the gatherings you must learn to walk away from. Some of the most exhausting events are the ones filled with forced socializing. Large parties where you're expected to make small talk for hours, where the conversation never goes deeper than surface level pleasantries. For some, this kind of environment might seem enjoyable, but for many, especially as you grow older, it begins to feel meaningless. You find yourself in a room full of people, yet feeling strangely alone. And the effort it takes to engage, to keep up appearances, to pretend you're interested in conversations that don't fulfill you, it's exhausting. The reality is, as you age, your patience for shallow interactions dwindles. You start craving depth, conversations with meaning, interactions that leave you feeling connected rather than drained. If a gathering is filled with noise but lacks substance, you don't need to be there. If a conversation goes in circles but never reaches the heart of anything real, you don't have to engage. There's something liberating about knowing that your time is too precious for anything that doesn't add value to your life. And let's talk about the gatherings that revolve around outdated expectations, the ones where you're expected to play a role that no longer fits you. Maybe it's a community event where people still see you as the person you were decades ago without recognizing who you are today. Maybe it's an obligation that you've outgrown, but people still expect you to show up, to contribute, to participate in a way that doesn't align with your current season of life. It's easy to feel guilty about stepping away from these commitments. You don't want to disappoint anyone. You don't want to be seen as selfish. But here's the truth. Letting go of obligations that no longer serve you isn't selfish. It's self-care. You are allowed to evolve, you are allowed to shift your priorities, and you are certainly allowed to choose peace over obligation. Think about how many times you've attended a gathering simply because it was expected of you, because you didn't want to offend anyone, because you felt guilty saying no. And now ask yourself, was it worth it? Did it leave you feeling joyful, or did it leave you counting the minutes until you could leave? The beauty of aging is that you no longer need to make excuses. You can simply say, I won't be attending, and let that be enough. You don't need to justify your decisions. You don't need to offer explanations. You owe it to yourself to spend your time in ways that truly fulfill you, not in ways that merely satisfy the expectations of others. And speaking of expectations, let's talk about the pressure to attend events that revolve around excessive food, excessive drinking, excessive spending. There comes a point in life when more isn't better, when overindulgence doesn't bring joy, it brings discomfort. Maybe once upon a time, staying out late at parties, indulging in rich foods, or drinking just a little too much felt like fun. But as you grow older, you become more aware of how these choices affect you. A late night now means an exhausting next day. An overindulgent meal now means discomfort rather than pleasure. An evening filled with excess leaves you feeling worse, not better. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating. There's nothing wrong with enjoying good food, good company, and a good time. But when an event pressures you to consume beyond what feels right for your body, it's not a celebration anymore. It's a test of endurance. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to keep up with habits that no longer suit your well-being. You are allowed to step away from gatherings that encourage overindulgence and instead choose events where moderation is respected, where balance is valued, and where you leave feeling well, not unwell. And let's not forget the gatherings that demand more than just your physical presence, the ones that require you to emotionally perform, to be cheerful when you're not, to pretend everything is fine when it isn't, to put on a mask for the sake of making others comfortable. These are some of the most exhausting gatherings of all. You've spent a lifetime showing up for others. You've carried burdens silently, smiled through discomfort, and played the role of the strong one, the dependable one, the one who always shows up no matter what. But now it's time to show up for yourself. If an event requires you to be anything other than your authentic self, then it's not a place you need to be. If a gathering doesn't allow space for honesty, for real emotions, for genuine connection, then it's not worth your time. You've earned the right to be where you feel at peace, to choose joy over obligation, to say no without guilt, to surround yourself with people who uplift rather than drain you, to attend gatherings that leave you feeling full rather than empty. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every event is worthy of your time. And the moment you start prioritizing your well-being over social expectations, something incredible happens. You start truly living. You start experiencing joy in its purest form. You start creating a life that reflects who you are today, not who others expect you to be. You don't have to attend every gathering. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to feel guilty for choosing peace over performance. This is your time, your energy, your life. Protect it. One of the most liberating truths you come to understand with age is that you no longer have to be everywhere at once. You don't have to say yes to everything. You don't have to force yourself into spaces that no longer feel comfortable, gatherings that leave you emotionally or physically depleted. Life is too precious to spend it in places where you do not feel valued, appreciated, or at peace. Some gatherings demand too much energy, too much patience, too much pretending. They ask you to be someone you're not, to engage in conversations that don't interest you, to participate in traditions that no longer bring you joy. And if you're honest with yourself, you know when you're at an event that doesn't align with who you are anymore. You can feel it in your body. The restless tapping of your fingers, the forced smiles, the subtle checking of the time, hoping that soon it will be acceptable for you to leave. But why wait? Why force yourself through an experience that does nothing for your well-being? You don't need permission to step away. You don't need approval to choose yourself. There are gatherings where you feel light, where laughter comes easily, where the company feels natural and comforting, There are spaces where you feel truly seen and heard, where conversations nourish your spirit instead of draining it. These are the places where you belong, not in rooms filled with competition, tension, or expectation, not at events where you're merely fulfilling a role instead of being your true self. One of the hardest things to do is to let go of long-standing obligations. Maybe it's a yearly event you've always attended. Maybe it's a social group that once brought you joy but now feels like a duty. Maybe it's a holiday tradition that year after year has begun to feel more like work than celebration. But just because something has always been a part of your life doesn't mean it still deserves a place in it. Growth means learning when to let go, when to release the things that no longer fit, when to stop doing something just because it's what you've always done. Think about the events that truly add to your life. The quiet morning coffee with an old friend, the intimate family dinner where stories are shared without judgment, the peaceful afternoon in the garden, the book club where discussions go beyond small talk. These are the gatherings worth keeping. These are the moments worth prioritizing. The rest, the noise, the obligations, the expectations, you can let them go. And in letting them go, you make space. Space for peace, space for joy, space for experiences that align with the person you are today. Because you are not the same person you were 20 years ago. Your priorities have changed, your needs have shifted, and the beauty of aging is the wisdom to recognize that not everything and not everyone needs to come with you into this new chapter. There will be people who don't understand your choices, people who expect you to show up just because you always have, people who may even try to make you feel guilty for prioritizing your own well-being. But their expectations are not your responsibility. Their disappointment is not your burden. You are not here to please everyone. You are here to live a life that feels good to you. There is something so powerful about stepping into your later years with clarity and confidence, about knowing what you need and unapologetically choosing it, about protecting your energy, your peace, your time, about saying no to what no longer serves you and yes to what truly matters. Because this life is yours and you are allowed to live it in a way that feels right for you. There's a quiet power in choosing your own path, in deciding once and for all that your time is no longer up for negotiation, that your presence is a privilege, not a requirement, that you will no longer spend your days fulfilling expectations that don't align with your own happiness. And that realization changes everything. The moment you stop attending gatherings that drain you, you start noticing something incredible. You begin to feel lighter. Your days feel more peaceful. The weight of obligation, of forced interactions, of uncomfortable silences slowly lifts. You reclaim the time and energy you once gave away so freely, and suddenly you realize just how much you were sacrificing for the sake of tradition, expectation, or simply habit. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely, and choosing solitude over an exhausting gathering does not mean isolation. It means self-awareness. It means recognizing that your company is just as valuable as anyone else's, that you don't need an invitation to feel included or a crowded room to feel important. Some of the most fulfilling moments in life happen in quiet spaces, in the presence of just one or two people who truly matter. The gatherings you do choose to attend will begin to mean more, because now you're going not out of obligation, but because you genuinely want to be there. The conversations will feel richer, the laughter more sincere, because you're no longer dividing your time between what lifts you up and what wears you down. You're pouring your energy into the places and the people who bring out the best in you. Imagine how much more meaningful life becomes when every event you attend is one that fills your spirit, when every interaction is one that nurtures rather than drains your soul. When you wake up in the morning knowing that your day belongs to you, not to anyone else's expectations, that is freedom. That is peace. It's not about shutting people out. It's not about isolating yourself or refusing to engage with the world. It's about being selective, about making choices that honor who you are and what you need, about stepping away from anything that feels like a burden and stepping toward what feels like home. This is your time. You've spent years, maybe decades, putting others first, making sure everyone else was comfortable, accommodated, taken care of. But now it's your turn. Your turn to protect your peace. Your turn to prioritize your well-being. Your turn to choose joy over duty, presence over performance, fulfillment over obligation. And the beauty of it is, once you start living this way, you inspire others to do the same. You give them permission to make choices that serve their own happiness. You show them that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to put themselves first, that it's okay to walk away from what no longer feels right. So take a deep breath, let go of the guilt, release the need to explain yourself. You are not responsible for how others feel about your choices. You are only responsible for making choices that feel right for you. There is so much life left to live, and you deserve to live it on your own terms. To spend your days in the company of those who truly appreciate you, to create moments that feel meaningful rather than forced, to fill your time with laughter, with love, with peace. Not every gathering deserves your presence. Not every invitation deserves a yes. The greatest lesson of all is learning when to walk away. And in doing so, you step into something far greater, a life that is fully, beautifully, unapologetically yours. The greatest wisdom that comes with age is knowing that your time is the most valuable thing you have. You no longer need to spend it in places that exhaust you, with people who don't uplift you, or at gatherings that feel more like obligations than joy. You are not here to please everyone. You are here to live a life that feels peaceful, fulfilling, and true to who you are today, not who you were decades ago, and certainly not who others expect you to be. Walking away from gatherings that drain you is not selfish, it's self-respect. It's recognizing that your energy is a limited resource and choosing to invest it wisely. It's knowing that life is too short for forced conversations, meaningless comparisons, or events that leave you feeling empty rather than enriched. So let this be the season where you choose wisely, where you say yes only to what brings you joy and no to what no longer serves you, where your presence is a gift given only where it truly belongs, because this life is yours and you deserve to live it with peace, purpose, and the freedom to decide exactly where you want to be.